What's going on, guys? This is Rob. If you guys enjoy my content, make sure you hit the subscribe button and make sure you hit that little bell so you never miss out on my sexy voice. Okay, the Inhumans are dead. Thank God. Like, there's no one out there who's just like, oh no, the Inhumans are dead. Oh, it's so sad. No, it's not. Everybody hates the Inhumans. They're like a poor man's X-Men. Okay, so, death of the Inhumans. Donny Cates strikes again. Dude, this guy, Jesus Christ. This guy could write a comic book about like the X-Men staring at like a blank wall, and it'd be like the most exciting thing. I'd be like, this is like the best story ever. You know, like, it's amazing. Donny Cates is one hell of a writer. So this whole thing kicks off literally with like the Inhumans observing all these Inhumans out in space who have basically been killed. And they have the words join or die written on their chest. Now, of course, you've got Black Bolt basically taking down all their names, different things like that. But there is a reason why this happened. Now, something else that I also want to explain here, I'm going to talk about it here for a second, is something called the Four Cities. Now, when it comes to the Inhumans, there's technically 5 cities. There is the main Attilan city of the Inhumans, which is the ones you're used to seeing, Medusa, Black Bolt, so on and so forth. During Jonathan Hickman's run on the Fantastic Four, he introduced something, well, at least a concept called the War of the Four Cities. And what you ended up learning was that in the early days of Inhuman society, there were those who broke away and formed their other tribes, formed 4 other tribes. And the idea was that in order to maintain peace among the tribes, Black Bolt basically married brides from each one of the tribes. So he had his main wife, Medusa, and then he had his side chicks. And in doing this, what it did is it created a kind of peace of sorts, but that's what Marvel used as kind of a jumping out, like kind of a launching platform when you went into like the aftermath of Infinity, when you ended up having like the Terrigen bomb that was detonated by Black Bolt, and then in turn the Terrigen mist spread throughout the rest of the world. It was kind of like building on that principle that Hickman established, which allowed him to in turn set off the events of Infinity, which in turn allowed Marvel to set off the events of Inhuman. But the fact remains, the idea was to basically meet with the other Inhuman tribes to essentially sit down and to say, here's what we're going to do. Either we're going to surrender to the Kree, who are basically going on this rampage and killing everybody, or we're going to vote for war. The idea of Black Bolt was to vote for war, but getting here and basically realizing that like all these members had been killed, that they've all basically been executed save for one, which is basically dying, that Gordon goes through, reads their mind, and that's when he finds out that essentially what had happened was that when this meeting was initially set up, that essentially a person named Vox, like a being named Vox, who was essentially working for the Kree, showed up here. Now Vox, if you guys notice, Vox looks almost exactly like Black Bolt from the Earth X series. I don't really know if there's a reason for that, but probably because that version of Black Bolt looked really badass. Vox shows up here and is basically like, look, you have an option. You can either join or you can die. And the response was all these leaders, these queens of these tribes voted to join. And in response, Vox was like, you're gonna die. And the reason why was because the message Vox was sending was not intended to send a message to all the Inhuman tribes around the universe that said like, hey, you know, join us or die. It was a message meant for Black Bolt. We'll find out why here in a minute. And so the message is, I'm wiping out everything you know and love. And not only that, really the stance of Vox is the Kree Empire has no room for cowards. And if you're willing to surrender, you're a coward. And we're basically getting rid of you. And so literally like all of them are essentially just like wiped out and they're annihilated, only for Gorgon to realize there's a bomb attached to her chest, which is one of the reasons why she wasn't immediately killed, because Vox knew the Inhumans would run to her side and try to get what information they could or try to save her life, hopefully bring her aboard the ship, and then, you know, everything blows up and they all end up getting killed in the process. And so basically everybody except for Gorgon is teleported out of there by Lockjaw, and that's when they really begin to realize what all's going on here. That if the crusade is to wipe out the Inhumans, and a bulk of the Inhumans have already been annihilated when they all basically met in one singular location, that only really leaves one location left. That's the home of the Inhumans on the planet Earth, on the blue area of the moon. And so that's when it's kind of like, okay, look, we have to get back as soon as we can, only for us to find out that Vox has been going through there and killing every single Inhuman on the moon, executing them all. I mean, no quarters given, no questions asked. He's just going through, not saying a word, just annihilating them all, just obliterating every last one of them until he comes across Maximus the Mad. Now, Maximus the Mad, of course, the crazy brother of Black Bolt, he's kind of like the Inhuman version of Loki, and literally pulls out like this freaking, like the biggest gun I've ever seen. And just like opens fire on Vox. And that's that, like Black Bolt begins to sort of put the pieces together and say, look, we have to jump back and get there as fast as possible. Well, the problem with this is that the rendezvous point, this meeting ground, was designed to be in a location where people couldn't just jump to, right? Because that's how ambushes get set up. And so they literally have to like race back to a point where they can teleport, where Lockjaw can teleport to a location and arrives on the scene. And the response of Vox is, I want you guys to send a message. Well, of course, Maximus is, I don't send a message, like I'm not a messenger. Like I'm not a message boy. And so Vox's response is, fine, if you won't send it willingly, then you'll send it with your death, and kills them both. Just like annihilates them both in the spot. And it's just like, Jesus. I mean, it's insane. I mean, it's just killing them left and right, just annihilating them at every single chance that he gets. And so this goes into really like the bigger picture of what's going on here, about like why all these Inhumans are being killed. And so what ends up happening is Karnak, who's a member of the Inhuman Royal Family, he doesn't actually have powers. He just can sense the weakness in things. And basically he goes to the Kree Empire and what's left of it. And this is an important thing because over the course of the last, really like if we run up until about Secret Wars, roughly around the time the Secret Wars happened, the Kree Empire, Marvel had kind of been writing it in a state of decline. And so what we end up finding out here was that somewhere along the line, there was the Supreme Intelligence, kind of the religious leader of the Kree Empire, had sent a faction of the Kree race into the furthest reaches of space to explore the edge of the universe, to see what was there, to see what was available. During that time, while they were exploring, the events of Annihilation, the events of Annihilation Conquest, the events of Black Vortex had gone on, so that when these guys came back, what they basically found was that the Kree race had been pushed to the brink of extinction, and their stance was, you're all cowards. You're all cowards and failures of men. If you guys were so easily destroyed, if you were so easily defeated, then you're all useless. You have no real place here. And so in response to this, the Supreme Intelligence was eliminated, Ronan the Accuser and the other Accuser Corps were exiled, and these old Kree are kind of retaking the throne and setting things back to the way they used to be. Like, we're going to take it back to the day when the Kree race was a race of power. And the first step to doing that is eliminating all the old things. And so that's why they're going through and killing all the Inhumans, is because in their mind, the Inhumans are basically reminiscent of like the new way of Kree's doing things. They're reminiscent of the Kree weakness. And so you end up having like, of course, Karnak basically saying, look, like, I'm not here to surrender to you. That was never going to happen. Like, I'm here to talk about surrender, but I'm here to talk about your surrender. And that's when you end up having him basically saying, like, my King Black Bolt has a message. And when Karnak's taken hostage, when he's stabbed, Black Bolt walks into this place and just starts screaming. And it's one of the coolest things. It's one of the coolest things ever, where Black Bolt goes through and just starts screaming and killing everyone he sees. Just screaming at all these Kree and just destroying their physical forms, just like just annihilating them. And as he goes through and as he says this, that in years following that, people would begin to call it the Black Eulogy. That Black Bolt was going through, and what he was doing was saying the names of all the Inhumans who had been killed by the Kree up to that point, and just literally delivering this eulogy that resulted in the deaths of all these different Kree soldiers. I mean, and they flew in everything. They brought in like warships, they brought in tanks, they brought in it all, and he destroyed them all nonetheless. I mean, you're talking about a guy whose voice is powerful enough to destroy planets, so it kind of makes sense. But as he's doing this, he's literally tearing apart his vocal cords. And so what ends up happening is that in the midst of all this, Vox takes Karnak and is basically like, you can stop screaming or Karnak can die. And so Black Bolt, this is actually a change of pace. Black Bolt ends up using like Inhuman sign language. Now, historically speaking, that's not what Black Bolt ever did. Whenever Black Bolt would communicate, Medusa would always go with him. And the reason why was because she was the one that could basically read his body language and know what it is that he's wanting to say. It was like she just knew him that well. And so it's kind of an interesting thing, because it allows Donny Cates to bring in the idea of Black Bolt operating independently of everybody else without Medusa being there, but still being able to communicate to a degree. And so when he literally starts moving in sign, and the question of Vox is, what the heck is he saying? Karnak's response is, Black Bolt's saying, don't kill him, take me instead. And that's exactly what Vox does. Vox moves behind Black Bolt and slices his throat, taking away his ability to scream. It's pretty brutal. And so from there, like literally they restitch his throat back together. But that was the nature of the prophecy. The prophecy here was that the Kree created the Inhumans, and the entire Inhuman project was scrapped, or it was supposed to be scrapped, because a prophecy came into existence that said somewhere along the line, one of these Inhuman projects is going to destroy the Kree Empire. And so basically that prophecy comes in the form of Black Bolt. Hence the reason why his throat was slashed, because if he can't scream, he can't destroy the Empire. And so the idea is to keep him in prison, but also force him to witness the death of everything he loves. And where a couple of the guys begin to taunt him, he suddenly kind of just starts whispering names. And this is when it sort of gives birth to a new power with Black Bolt, in the sense that instead of having this quasi-sonic scream that destroys everything around it kind of emits like this high-pitched pulse. And as it does that, it just kind of scrambles the brains of the people around him, kind of creates a somewhat of a vibrating effect, I would imagine, and it basically results in the death of these two soldiers. And so with him doing that, he starts walking through, whispering in the ears of these guys and just destroying their brains in the process, picks up one of the guns and goes on a rampage, starts killing everyone he can find. And then once he gets into the actual science room, he finds Ronan the Accuser. And it's a sad moment, because what we end up finding out here is that Ronan the Accuser in of himself is pretty powerful, but the idea was to basically subjugate him, to turn him into some kind of a hybrid. We don't really know what the exact intention was. And so what he tells him, what Ronan tells Black Bolt is, do not leave me like this. I am a warrior of honor. I'm a man who's lived and fought an honorable life. Do not let me die a death like this. Give me an honorable death. And that's the response of Black Bolt. He literally whispers in his ear and says, you are forgiven for everything you've done. And that kills Ronan the Accuser. It's sad. Like it's a very sad thing because you have this battle-hardened guy who's just kind of living out his last days, hooked up to a machine, being converted into some kind of cyborg organism. And so what you end up having is the rest of the Inhumans. You have Medusa, you have Crystal, you have the rest of the Inhumans who sit down and say, we can't save Black Bolt on our own. We need help. And so what they end up doing is traveling off to like the far reaches out in the middle of nowhere, really to Marcus Centauri. And when they get there, they say, this is the person we're hunting for, only for us to find out they're looking for Beta Ray Bill. Something else to notice here is Beta Ray Bill has a dad bod because he's just been getting drunk. That's all he's been doing. Not only that, initially he brushes them off, right? He's just kind of like, I don't care, and there's no reason for him to. But what we end up finding out here is that Beta Ray Bill and Lockjaw were actually really good friends. Apparently they had adventures together. Like Beta Ray Bill and Lockjaw had like adventures together. Like they went and like did stuff and had like these amazing moments and stories and stuff like that. I want to read that. Like I want to read like a mini series, or like just a series of one shots where it's just like the adventures of Beta Ray Bill and Lockjaw. Like I think it'd be absolutely amazing to see Beta Ray Bill and Lockjaw teaming up and going on adventures together. But the fact remains, once they sit down and basically explain to Beta Ray Bill what's going on, his stance is, okay, fine, you guys just sit tight, I'll take care of it. And the Inhumans' response is absolutely not, because this is our race. This is our, like, we're here for your help, but we're not here to have you do all the heavy lifting. And that makes sense, because remember, historically speaking, when it comes to the Inhumans, they usually keep their stuff in-house. They don't usually air their dirty laundry, right? They're much like the X-Men in that regard. What happens in Inhuman society stays in Inhuman society. And so with Black Bolt going through and basically like whispering in the ears of these soldiers, killing all these different guys, he ends up coming face to face with Vox. And as he goes through and as he fights them, this also leads to the arrival of like Beta Ray Bill. And so of course, Beta Ray Bill throws his hammer, ends up incapacitating Vox, and basically, kind of knocking some sense into him. And the reason why is because once that happens, Vox begins to kind of look around and say, where the hell am I? What's going on here right now? And so the initial response is to try to kill him. And while Medusa, reconciles with Black Bolt while they get back together again, you end up having like Karnak, who literally goes through and starts tearing apart the armor of Vox, like literally just starts like ripping all this stuff apart, only for us to find out that this Vox is actually Maximus the Mad. That is kind of a crazy thing. In the middle of all that, the bomb goes off inside this version of Vox, which incinerates Crystal in her entirety. So now she's dead. But once this is realized that it's actually Maximus the Mad, the question becomes, why in the world would Maximus the Mad turn against the Inhumans? And that's when we end up following Crystal, and we end up basically realizing that what's happening here is Lockjaw, Maximus the Mad, Crystal, they're not being killed. They're being teleported. They're being sent to the labs of the Kree, and what they're doing is they're experimenting. Like they're literally modifying the genes of all the Inhumans they capture, and they're turning them all into Vox. That Vox is not one person. Vox is an army of people. Now, how many Inhumans here that they have, we don't know. It seems like they have hundreds, if not possibly even thousands. And so it's kind of bonkers to see all that, because it's Karnak who begins to pick it up. Karnak begins to realize what's going on and basically says, if all these are versions of a character named Vox, that means there has to be a Vox Prime. And if there's a Vox Prime, then it's entirely possible there's a hive mind there, a kind of network. And if there is, sever the source and you free everybody else. But the other response of Karnak is, one thing you have to remember, Black Bolt, is you have one good scream left in your voice. After that, your voice will be gone forever. You'll never be able to scream. You'll never be able to talk again. And so where Black Bolt's initial response is to believe that Karnak wants him to basically play it safe, to kind of say like, stay behind, play your role as king. And instead, what Karnak says is like, I'm not telling you not to scream. What I'm telling you is that when the time comes when you do scream, make it count. Make sure it's a scream that people will talk about from now until eons to come. And so that's when the Inhumans basically launch their attack. They literally end up attacking like the home base of the Kree Empire, at least what's left of the Kree Empire. They literally fly their ship into the Citadel, only to turn around and be met by Crystal, who's been transformed into Vox, and Lockjaw, who's been transformed as well. Now, it's kind of a cool thing, because what this means is Lockjaw is alive. So it means they can save Lockjaw, which is awesome, because as we all know, we don't care what happens in the movie, TV show, and or comic, so long as you don't hurt the dogs. Do not hurt the dog, because if you hurt the dog, there will be hell to pay. But nonetheless, facing off against like all these Vox characters, that's the other thing that Karnak picked up on, is originally what they believed was that Vox had like all the Inhuman powers. But what they're doing is that because all these versions of Vox are Inhumans with their powers still intact, they're basically fighting an army of Inhumans with a wide array of different abilities, teleportation and all those different things. And so for the most part, they're all basically lost. And so Black Bolt does the only thing that he believes he can do. Because of the fact that these guys are all lost, they've been totally transformed, there's no way to seemingly recover them, or at least there doesn't appear to be a way to recover them. What Black Bolt ends up doing is screaming and basically destroys all these Inhumans who are Vox hosts, who are essentially Voxes. And this is rough, because when you're Black Bolt, when you're the Midnight King of the Inhuman society, your stance is, I have to protect my people. I have to keep my people safe. This is like Charles Xavier if he had to kill all the X-Men. It's crushing. Like, it's a devastating thing for him to have to do. But in reality, it's the better option here because they don't have the time to basically go back and like fix all this. And so they do the only thing they can do. In the middle of all this, what it does is it destroys a kind of neural hub, basically, of the Vox concepts. What comes out of this is it basically frees Lockjaw and it frees Crystal. But they're the only ones of the Inhumans outside of like the immediate royal family who are basically left alive. And so what this means is that all Inhumans across the world, when they basically kind of remuster their forces, all the Inhumans who have ever existed in the universe, who currently do exist in the universe, are all dead. The only Inhumans that currently exist are Black Bolt, Medusa, Gorgon, Kraken, and Crystal, and Lockjaw. And that's it. Everybody else is gone. It's kind of nuts. It's basically resetting it all back to zero. It's very House of M, wiping out all the Inhumans across the universe and reducing the number down to only like 5 or 6, and that's it. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comments Explain, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.